Good morning, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, whoever is going to join. This space, I know there are a couple of them these later days, mostly because, as I said, we are coming towards the end of the year. And so far, it is looking like basically the claim that the year would end differently for the Russians than last year is proving to be absolutely correct. But I wanted to make a retrospective space. This is not it, but the retrospective space will have to wait for three main reasons. The first, Avdiivka is not closed. Uh, the correction phase of the front is still not giving, in my opinion, the expected ratios, mostly because the Ukrainians have understood, and except for a small attempt on the west of Robotino towards Kopani, there is almost nothing offensive, except a small attempt on the landfill to Holivka, which was said to have been repulsed. The video, I had a discussion with a follower, and I said I would gladly admit I was wrong. While looking at a couple of videos, including some locations, we found out, and I agree with the follower, that indeed what was claimed by the Russians on the video was probably a little bit overestimated, because you could see that on that hill on Gorlovka, next to the contact line, there was maybe not an attack ongoing by foot mobiles, but there was bombardment towards Russian trenches. And indeed, the Russians, by presenting as repulsing a Ukrainian attack, put the Ukrainians somewhere where they weren't. But subsequently, apparently, there's another video who shows that they are moving towards that landfill. And it is, as the Twitter member, I'm going to add his handle. It was a ballsy move. We find with a lot of guys, but especially with Dr. Snekotron, that first of all, it's a political decision and a small relief attempt from Avdiivka, because Golovka, of course, is very important for the Russians. And it seems like a desperation attack. But given what I said the last couple of spaces, that the most problematic thing right now is to repel infantry groups, because right now they are supported by FPVs, which makes everything nimble. You don't need much artillery to advance up to a certain point. Of course, then you need supplies and you need cover, so you can advance, just not too much. But this advance can be panicky for the side who suddenly founds a group of enemy soldiers. I would speak also about the same tactic that apparently the Russians are using in Avdiivka. As you may know, during the course of the last day, they advanced extremely deeply onto the southern basically industrial area. Anyway, this wasn't the problem. The problem is, as I said, first of all, Ukrainians have stopped almost all their advances, so therefore the end of the year is not completely drawn. We still can have some surprises. As I said, the fact that they're still pushing towards Kopani and now in Golovka, those are surprising factors, not very interesting for us. That's one part. The second attribute is that there are a lot of things that we still need to understand about 2023. This space is actually due to the fact that we finally may have understood the correlation between Bakhmut, Wagner, and the counter timeline, the link between both. And also we might have a explanation on why Wagner went on its rampage the 23rd and 24th of June. It's coming, don't you worry. So that's the second problem. And the third problem, most importantly, we have no view on what exactly are the Ukrainians going to do until the end of the year? Contrary to what you are all thinking, there is still 44 days to the end of the year. That's a lot. I'm going to use some examples that we don't like, but still I'm going to give them. It took between preparation and execution of the Kharkov push exactly 17 days. You know how it went. I'm not saying that the Ukrainians are anywhere near that situation. I'm just saying that time is of essence here. There is plenty of time to see small surprises or big surprises on both sides. Therefore, as I said, I will reserve my end of year retrospective rather at the end of December. In mid-December, I'm going to, as I say, I'm first going to check for sure the information that apparently I was privy of, which is a couple of satellite images around the area of Nikopol and deeper. Those mean nothing, by the way, because the only passage to go to Zaporozhye is around that area. They're not going to go up north because that would mean that would have to separate all the forces instead of putting them in one point and pushing them forward for a interesting assault. But there is more and more talk about one last PR move between December and February on the Ukrainian side, and that would be the attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, basically taking Energodar, and that's it. It's not about going deep. Maybe they could exploit it, but most of it, what's happening is that they are trying to redo what they did or tried to do last October, which was a massive failure, 90 special forces and other Marines killed on that assault. It was never spoken about until they said that, yes, indeed, it happened. Remember when the Russians posted, Tsipso had literally to make fakes about the fact that that never happened, although it happened, and people started to get awards for dying around Nikopol. And we also had a couple of footage from the Russian side, the SSO. Actually, part of it was taking out some boats before they could launch their attacks. Anyway, this is why we're not going to have a retrospective now. First, it's too early. Two, there are still ongoing operations on both sides, and three, we need to check. I need to check the situation regarding Energodar. That's for the introduction. Second part is the meat of the argument. The meat of the argument is that, as you may have read on my timeline, Censor.net posted a interview with a handicapped former commander of a company. So it was the fourth company of the second battalion of the 47th mechanized brigade of the Ukrainian armed forces. Guy is literally called Mykola Melnik. It is possible that it is the guy one of the guys who we saw at the infamous Minesweeper video. I am going to post the full article in its retrospective in its order, so you can read it. I already posted some gems, but basically, I'm going to make the linkage of this article with a lot of things that I said in the run-up to the war, with actually what we knew at some point given to the leaks. So the two Turkish leaks are going to make their intro here, because I have made jokes about Jack Teixeira, but the guy needs to be freed. I'm not sure he's going to accept being exchanged for some Ukrainian guy and go and live his life in Russia. But I think Russia, at least for the Zaporozhye counteroffensive, owes him a fuck ton of things. Not as much into the intelligence proper, because I think that the Russians knew a lot of things that we read on those reports. Most of them were executive summaries, which probably from some reason the Russians, by satellite, by Humin, by SIGINT, whatever, might have sniffed. But those were literally, and I'm going to be the first to say, I wasn't trusting them at all, because the leaks were, I thought, just before a huge offensive from the Ukrainian side. And, well, to us, it was literally, to a lot of guys within the TWK group, we couldn't believe it. It's not as much that it couldn't be true. It's just it cannot be only this. Then let's start with the argument. The article basically shows a couple of things. First of all, and I already had made a post about this. Post is gone now because it was probably under the 31 account or even beyond that, under the Xim Kulufi account. Hubris apparently played a huge role. And hubris was on both sides. If you read the article, the Americans were literally, when they went to train in Germany and the US or whatever they went to train, Americans told them, these vehicles are just literally going to smash everything that Russians have. It's in the article. I've already posted part of it, but you have to read the article because you can feel that up until they went to war, the idea was, whatever the Russians have, it's shit. You're going to walk over them, and that's it. You're going to show up them, Russia's going to flee. And also, he was discussing something actually very utilitarian, is that he said when you were in the Ukrainian army, your preparation was absolutely not interesting. It was basically, you go there, you cannot use your gun because you don't have enough ammunition for it. You cannot start the engine of your BMP-2 because you don't have fuel for it, you don't have batteries for it. Basically, the army, the Ukrainian army, if it's left alone, according to him, of course, is not able to do any kind of operations. While when they went to training with the Americans, he said there was always, do you have enough? Did you train enough? Do you want more? Do you want more? This is very interesting because, as I said, it's true. For the small force that they prepared, there was enough to train them, to prepare them, and they had to learn everything quasi by muscle memory. However, this training, this preparation, everything, took a long time. He says that it was at least 2 months. I have a hard time to believe it. But actually, it also makes sense. Why? Because you need to prepare both as being a TC, because in this case, he was supposed, given that he's a commander of a subunit, he would ride on the Bradley and he wouldn't be a dismount. He technically could very well be also in the turret, but in this case, I think he was in control of the basic comms and BMS being within the Bradley M2A2 ODS. Anyway, that's just something else. But overall, what it says that, yeah, Americans train as well and forced us to repeat things until we knew it by heart. Here, this is the first problem. You cannot train someone to learn everything by heart going into a place where the first thing that is true and the only thing that is true is that everything is changing. You can train how to react under stress. You can train how to mount, dismount, be proficient with the system as a specialty. So basically, mount, dismount your gun, clear a jam. If you have a breakdown with your comms or with your power line within the Bradley or whatever, fine, that I can accept. It's logical. That's what I also, in a sense, we did in the Albanian army when I was doing my thing. The problem is that once you're under duress and stress, no situation is the same. And then we go to the second step. Second step, that the training was, training for them, but it gave them a sense that they were proficient enough with the weapon system, but also on using it when it comes to the terrain and so on. The second part is that once that was done, they were given their orders. Around mid-May, they were transferred in Orikhiv. Pay very attention to the date, because I'm going to make the link with something else, but later on. They were transferred in Orikhiv, and then they were given 3 weeks to prepare even more. And apparently what they were doing, they were preparing their active assaults, so basically the mechanized force, mechanized assaults, and also, very interestingly, the pathway and the sense of the attack. First wave, second wave, third wave, and so on. Here we have everything that went wrong, in my opinion. You cannot repeat something 2-3 weeks in advance over and over and over and over again without three things. First of all, whoever is looking at you is going to know you're there. Second of all, what are you repeating over and over and over again? You are repeating based on information that you have beforehand. Who is there to say to us that the information that they had, and this is my estimation, was wrong? It seems to me that everything that they attempted, especially under Robotine, didn't take into account what the fuck they did in the middle of March 2023 when they got basically beaten the fuck out. And the third point, this is the most important part. When you are repeating over and over and over and over and over and over again, what you're doing is like you are straining and you are putting a tunnel vision on your man. This is something that on the few occasions when you had a multitasking maneuver when I was a TC, happened most of the time. What we knew to do in the tank were majorly simple tasks. We knew them well. We knew how to cut corners, how to go a bit faster, basically have a mostly hunch ranging, not exactly ranging perfectly, but once you got the hunch, the gunner would refine the ranging itself and would be mostly okay. Why? Because at some point, what we were training for were almost the same kind of tactics, so the same kind of distances, and the same kind of, well, environment. However, this, when it comes to the Ukrainian side, wasn't the actual environment that we're into. When I was training for gunnery tactics, we went most of the time to a polygon, so basically a range, and we had different targets, different movements, approaches, and so on. Couple of times we went to the positions where we're supposed to defend. And then it was a bit different for us because most of the time we wouldn't have enough ammunition to train properly. And that completely changed the dynamics. And in this case, it's just the same that what happened. These guys were training for ranges, for virtual targets, and so on. But then they came both into the shit, but also into an environment they didn't knew. They didn't knew directly. They weren't in the juice. Most of the videos that would have had were overhead videos by drones, satellite videos, and possibly humaned if people were allowed to go through those areas among the Russian soldiers. The problem is that, once again, you are going to say, but no, there's no way that you speak about ISR for so long, but these guys didn't know what happened. That's the problem. We know that this is true. We know that because Tatar gave me explained that despite every tools that they had, by the month of May, they missed about 40% of the hidden positions. ATGMs, mine clearing, fighting positions, and mortar and light artillery like D30s. You can check it. Go to Tatar Gemi if you're not blocked. You go on search and say, I don't know, we didn't saw or whatever. Hidden Russian positions. You do the search, you're going to find the thread, and then you're going to understand. So, if you put everything that he said, once again, is what he says, but given that he's lost 2 legs, and he was saying, I don't have any legs for the next counter, I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but still, it's pure karma for the guy like him. He has nothing to lie about. Therefore, what I'm seeing is the following. These guys, and I already more or less explain that or tell that to Snake in private. These guys had no fucking clue where they were going through. They didn't knew that the Russians basically knew their approaches. Actually, he says in the interview, he said that we understood when we were under fire that they knew our approaches, where we are going to come from, what we were trying to do, which were our vehicles, how many troops we had. And at some point, he says in the article that normally they should have pushed 12 kilometers the first day. And fortunately says that we failed and we only had to march 6 kilometers. So basically, they didn't even cross the contact line the 9th of June when they first went to attack. Other important part is that he explains that the planning went to shit because they were 3 hours late. So basically, the Russians, once they knew what happened, what was going to come, where they were going to attack. Second part, the synchronicity of the attack was completely fucked up. We saw that as well because sometimes, I don't know if you remember, very early on in June, we could see tanks burning on the side of and Ukrainians still ongoing in the minefield and still getting stuck. You remember at the beginning we only had one Leopard and a couple of vehicles around it, and then we had a bunch of Bradleys stuck at the exact same position. And given what we know, partially or fully, the guy is telling the truth. The whole attack part was a shit show. Communication broke down. And this, in my opinion, justifies what I'm saying. These guys had prepared for one and single scenario. And that scenario didn't never happen. They didn't have the time to conclude. And yes, he says, yes, we got the landing, we repulsed the first counterattack. That never happened. When you see the 9th of June where they are, where the Leopards, Bradleys and everything is, they are not there. They are 4 kilometers behind that line. And Russians, you guys remember, and we had this schizo-doomerism. Why didn't they put a grenade on those Leopards and those Bradleys? Bitch, nobody cares right now. Reality is that these guys had a plan to march 12 kilometers, so basically go way past Rabotino, straight to Novoprokopivka, the first fucking day. It failed. And as I'm explaining here, it failed, in my opinion, for various reasons. First of all, Russians knew. And how did the Russians knew? ISR, local ISR, SIGINT, HUMINT for sure. And most importantly, all this was confirmed to them pretty soon. Not the exact plan where they're going to come, but who was going to come. What was going to be the orbit of these units. The Russians, okay, there was the announcement that yada, 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 Bradleys, Leopards, Polish T-72s, PT-90M, 91M, sorry, T-72EAs, all this shit, fine, good, logical. But those leaks actually gave them the perfect orbit, and I'm going to say once again, there is something need to be done by Jack Teixeira, even if the guy doesn't want, because he literally appended probably, okay, the operation was already doomed, but he gave up the orbit, and that also, by the dates that were on those leaks, you can see that most of them were supposed to end at the last day of April. So the preparations for transfer were for late April. These guys were never late. The 47 says it. We came for the fucking offensive in the middle of May. So basically, every planning that was done for the Ukrainian side was, according to what was pledged, enough, on time, and whatever delay there was, it wasn't on the American or the Western side. So that interview, in my opinion, shows that there is a huge problem in the narrative, a huge hole in the narrative, and I'm happy with it. I'm gonna be honest with it, because at the beginning, as I said, I didn't trust the leaks, and my paranoia took the best of me. Snake, he said from the beginning, guys, this is true. It's too stupid to be false. It's too straightforward to be false. Okay, there were some things that were changed, like in a couple of BDAs, the pictures were right. So what they had hit were completely right, but the coordinates were completely off. Who did that? Why did it happen? Was it like a kind of mole reading tactic that you diffuse some documents there with some changes and you only leave it to a specific terminals to narrow down who could have leaked them? I don't know. Honestly, it doesn't matter right now, because actually what was described on the BDA, so the battle damage assessments, was true. The buildings that you saw there, once you found them in the map, were indeed hit. That was completely true. So that, I mean, raised a kind of suspicion into me, and then I initially I completely rejected the leaks. I was thinking like, okay, this much is true, but this cannot be true. Turns out it was true. Not only was it true, but remember when I did the math initially based on the leaks, and I said, stricto sensu, we're speaking between 16 and 18,000 people based on what was on the leaks. But even if you add 3 more brigades, you're going to be at maximum 25,000. Turns out that on top of the brigades that were supposed to be there, these guys added a lot more. We had the 3rd regiment slash brigade Azov that came by to get beach slapped. We had people from 35th, 37 that lost almost 2 battalions straight off the bat. They need to grab people from the streets, reform, go back there, still get clapped. We had the 65th that was never supposed to be a frontline battalion, was supposed to be an exploitation brigade. When they got clapped in Robotine, they said that Robotine was a political act. We never controlled the village fully. Even today, we cannot stage anything from the village. So all these small things, once you've made the analysis based on the leaks, not alone what was announced by both sides, then made completely sense in the fact that, okay, this thing is going to happen around the month of May. Whatever delay was there, whatever re-preparation, refreshing, as I said, you're going to get trained, then you need to go back to Ukraine. I said this as well, to get a refresher, to get acquainted with the ground. 47th interview says exactly that. They came by, first thing they did, they tried to learn the ropes of the place they were going to attack. Voila. Once again, this is not me trying to play Cassandra or whatever. This is the logic, how it used to be for us as well. We knew the tank perfectly, but when we went to a maneuver outside of our normal range in the south, and we went up north, I had no fucking idea. I'm going to tell you, as an Albanian, I was ashamed. I had never put my feet into Mirdita when we were there end of 99. And it's a small country, guys, like, but I can perfectly understand a guy like him coming from Germany, his training, needed a complete refresh to find his way around the area. So all these things, when you analyze them to what we thought, to what the leaks were, to what probably Russia knew, and what is being said now by this guy of the 47, lead us to another pointer. And this is the second part, is what happened between Wagner and the Ministry of Defense. As I said, now that we have a more general view of the losses during the same period of time, we can understand that Wagner, despite the PR they were selling, weren't that much more effective. They lost artillery pieces, a lot of them. and it's normal. I mean, they were undergoing a huge pressure from the Ukrainian side on a spot that it was strategic. Never mind what idiots say, but also there were expenses. And Putin came out and said, like, of course, it was after the putsch. So this is the problem I have. This, I mean, the coup, the attempted coup or march for justice or whatever, it doesn't matter, should never have happened if both sides were completely honest with each other. And I think they were up to a certain point, but Monkey showed weakness. And instead of saying, guys, I'm gonna recall you, what happened is that around the month of April, probably, the first alarm signals on the Russian Ministry of Defense were like, bro, you are in Solidar since forever. You have now advanced the furthest to encircle or choke Bakhmut. What the fuck are you doing? And in the beginning, a lot of people said that Wagner was hoarding ammunition for its attempt to. It's very possible they were hoarding ammunition because actually there were 2 points of that. I said at the time that Wagner was playing hard to get because they were losing money and people, and it's true. Wagner was mostly a smallish operation, maximum a whole brigade size all over the world, Syria, Africa, Donbass, whatever. Now suddenly, they were a fucking army corps. And a lot of those people that are sent to die were Zeks, were former prisoners. For those, Wagner didn't get paid, or paid in a different way. So basically, got ammunition, got food for them, and they need to fucking deal with it. The Russian Ministry of Defense basically, in my opinion, once again, when you do the linkage of the timeline between the Ukrainian side and the Russian side, so that, okay, it's happening. These guys are coming for us around the month of May. The leaks probably comforted that. I don't know if the Russians believed it, but they had so many ways to know about what was coming without the leaks. Leaks, I want to say, in this case, are more tools for us, which are outside. And even for us, they are confirmation tools. Then they asked fucking Wagner, like, either you go on and get the fucking place, so take Bakhmut over, you push for it, either we cut your supplies because the counter in Zapo is coming. And the only way for Wagner to sustain their money, supplies, and refurbishment and replenishment in troops was from Bakhmut to go to Zapo. On that aspect, Prigozhin found, I think, 3 things. First of all, Bakhmut was all cool and good because they had so many backspace into Bakhmut, and the Ukrainians were on their back footing. But Zapo is a flat line. There is not much to hide, and we saw what happened. The first month was extremely murderous for the defending Russian troops, actually for the whole front, because they also started this counter in Bakhmut end of May. But for the month of June, it would have meant that whatever Wagner would have transferred to Zaporozhye, the losses the first month or that month of June would have been huge. So what did Wagner do? They basically held out. Prigozhin just made a business move. It had nothing to do with his love for Russia or whatever. In this sense, this is what I think why it also failed, because he threw a tantrum for so long and supposedly got what he wanted, because they got, by the 20th of May, they definitely got all of Bakhmut. And 28th, there is the Ukrainian counter fully. And by early June, from the 4th to the 9th, we got the real counter, if you want to believe Nafuitz. So there, I think the Russian Ministry of Defense said to fucking Wagner, it's very simple. You want to get your money, your Zeks, your supplies and everything? finish Bakhmut, pack the rest. Meanwhile, we are hoarding ammunition to sustain the Zapo front. So this is what you have. So therefore, also the documents shown by both sides, by Prigozhin and the Ministry of Defense, are, in my opinion, true. And Wagner had to storm the rest of the city with about 3-4 companies, about 500 men, and they had a month tops to do it. Therefore, in my opinion, and once again, it's not a cheap shot at Wagner because they shed their blood for Russia. This, I mean, you cannot deny that. Were there transactions? Of course there were, because it's a war. Big countries are going to make money on this war. You just have to see the Ukrainian side. Illegal, legal, whatever. But the point was the following. Now that we know more or less the timeline on the Ukrainian side, we also can understand why suddenly the Ministry of Defense of Russia went like, no, I don't want to fucking deal with you. And they probably gave a choice to Prigozhin, like, shut the fuck up, put your men to Zapo. If you don't want to go to Zapo, then pull them out, give up your ammunition, whatever you have, and we're done. You can continue playing cowboy and Africa chasing gold digger, whatever, Lord of War over there. But basically, the reduction of his ammunition, his funding, and his supplies meant also the sidelining of his quote unquote empire. Remember that by the month of March to May, Wagner was not only more popular than Ministry of Defense, but they literally inaugurated their fucking new center, who looked like a conglomerate of death merchants. And once again, I was very happy back then because I thought at this point, the Russian Ministry of Defense made its bed and said, okay, we're going to use them as some kind of stormtroopers, as some kind of firemen at the front, something that they're doing with the VDV and the Marines. And all the rest, it doesn't matter. It's okay. I mean, we're going to deal with it after the war, after the year, after the operation. This never flew with Prigozhin. The guy was greedy, was paranoid, he was proud and stubborn. And this is what happened. He didn't want to get sidelined. But once again, it's the Icarus syndrome. He forgot the hand who fed him. He forgot that his position was extremely fragile, in the sense that he was put there by the good graces of the political leadership. The military, in my opinion, used them for specific operations, for places they didn't want to start paying them out of their fucking budget. Although we learned that they were indeed paid by the military budget. So this is what happens, and this is, in my opinion, what actually changed everything for Prigozhin, but also for the Ukrainians. I think the Ukrainians, you remember the pieces by May and early June that, oh my God, the new guys in Bakhmut, they're far worse. Wagner was so better. They were the best. And in my opinion, this pull out of the Wagner troops in Bakhmut was a bit of a Damocles sword for Ukrainians, because first of all, they didn't know where the fuck they were going to pop out. They knew more or less they were regrouping in Rostov. And first, I think the first thing that happened for Ukrainian side that, okay, these motherfuckers are going to Zapo. We're going to have these assholes hitting back on us. You know what happened? The third week of the counter, while the Ukrainians weren't making a lot of progress, and we had this discussion about the fact that it had been 3 weeks that the Camo 52s were literally ripping new assholes to every kind of vehicle that in existence, including combines. They started this bullshit march for justice. which in fact contributed to huge damage to the Russian Air Force, damaged the reputation of the Russian Ministry of Defense, and also was supposed, from every pundit, to start the end of the war and the end of the Putin reign in Russia. You know what happened next? The Russian military leadership and everyone else literally came out, pledged allegiance to the authorities, the legal ones. Some people who were too close with Prigo, but in my opinion, deserve a lot better than this. We will not speak about Dar al-Harb. Got demoted and sidelined. This, in my opinion, also created a bit of a shock value. After that, we had Popov running his mouth over how fucking it was impossible to defend Zaporozhye. I think Popov tried something. His demotion wasn't as much because he was complaining about counter-battery, lack of supplies, lack of forces and everything. His demotion was linked to the fact that he ran his mouth for other subjects, including Prigozhin. Got demoted, positions were held. At what cost, would say the Ukrainians? Well, look at yourself. And there we had with this link between Wagner out, Russian military in, continuation of the defense down Zaporozhye, no losses, stubborn defense of the lines in Bakhmut, very, very slow advance on the Ukrainian side, major losses on the Ukrainian side, virtual stop of their counteroffensive around end of September. Then we had Avdiivka popping out the 10th of October. You know the situation of Avdiivka right now. It's a shit show for them. They had to pull one brigade for sure, but given the pace of advance of the Russians the last week, it's very possible that for once they did the right choice. They took the right decision to not defend the city in depth, but try to stall as much possible the Russians and try to evacuate it. This is so far what is looking, but as I said, I will not be 100% sure of it. Now, let's go back to what was also said into that interview, and let's go back to what we knew before that, what we said. First of all, the hubris. If you remember, I made a 3-point analysis on why the counter was going down to shit, and the biggest problem was that the hubris on the Ukrainian and Western side is that the Russians were idiots. They couldn't learn, they couldn't adapt, they weren't apt to critical thinking, and everything that they could do is just march in front, get killed, send another wave. This, of course, is an infantile description and was propaganda. However, it seemed that now that we read what was told to the 47th guys, it maybe wasn't just propaganda. When I wrote those lines back then, my idea was that instead they tried to pump up the Ukrainians, but in the way they got lost, and like every con man, at some point they make the mistake of believing their own con. And of course, the Russians gave them plenty to believe they were stupid, idiotic, and everything. And once again, not everything was a super ploy and for 36D chess. No, sometimes the Russians fucked up some
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
Operations way beyond, well before their consequences. So basically, first of all, they managed to fail their plan into going south of Kharkov. Ukrainians defended pretty well past Chuguiv. So basically, the railway tracks there were never threatened. Russians never touched the railways beyond Kharkov itself. So basically, the supply lines on the Ukrainian side were open. So it didn't matter how much Ukrainians died in Kharkov, they would still be coming plenty. And as you remember, it was the early war. So every Mykola, Taras, Seri, and Oksanka would just like grab a gun and go and get killed. Things changed once Kharkov fell. Front was shorter, lines were longer. The areas to attack were even worse. And same thing happens to Kherson. Kherson Russians fucked up actually way before their mistake was, or not mistake, but their failure was in Nesensk in March. Then when they had the possibility to push back in April, when they stopped the first counteroffensive in Kherson, which started the 15th of March towards Kherson, once they stopped it, after about 40 days, they pushed it back 10 kilometers, they just stopped. They were like, okay, we're exhausted, this shit has lasted enough. That was the biggest mistake. It would have been better to lose the positions in July and August in front of Nikolaev and allowed all the rest of the guys to be pulled back around the same time, so October, November, than do what happened, which is they left the Ukrainians within 17 kilometers from the city. Okay, between 25 17, depending which angle. But that allowed the Ukrainians to literally put high marshes behind Nikolaev and just fire at the bridge. And this was, as I said, there was the end of the adventure for Nikolaev, mostly because it started to dawn to the Russian minds that what happens with whatever position in our lines fall down, and then we had the breakthrough by the Ukrainians, who are going to cut our rear lines, and then we're going to have something that they have avoided until now. For real, it's amazing. Russians have avoided any kind of encirclement to sustain lives at the price of equipment. It isn't pretty. A lot of people will say it's shameful and this and that. There is no shame in war. Is the first rule you need to understand. War, you want to stay alive. There is no shame. You can use shame to your adversary, but you need to understand that he thinks the same. There is no shame. The only point is who stays at the end of your fight. Period. So all these mistakes that the Russians made were compounded and unfortunately gave this hubris to both Westerners and Ukrainians that Russians are stupid, that they are a paper tiger, they don't have the means, they can't evolve, they can't think, they can't change. While forgetting, and this is something that you have to give credit to many people within the Pentagon who saw exactly what happened with Kherson. And Kavoli, you remember his interview, said like, yeah, maybe you think that the Russian military was damaged, but actually the Russian military has grown in size. Some jets have been lost, some capacity has been lost, but the Air Force is mostly untouched. Their fleet is mostly untouched. Of course, it was back then. Their production capacities are growing. Now we know they're even better. So, strategically, Kherson, once again, was a tactical defeat, but a strategic solution that we are still enjoying, quote unquote. And this is the part where the second thing happens. I said to Americans and probably the Ukrainians, this relationship, because incestuous relationship in propaganda, means that one side is telling the other that everything is fine. The other said, oh, you're right, look at these stupid Russians. And because Ukrainians work so much with PR, so basically when they destroy something, they film it like, see, all these guys dead. Problem, as I said, once you start making the accounts, it's true. There's a lot of destruction on the Russian side, but there is also a lot of destruction on the Ukrainian side. And what in the beginning was a good ratio for them, honestly, So they were at around 1.4 something, 1 to 4. Then it fell down, and the reality is probably, if you have to be honest and include also light vehicles and shit, reality is that, as I said, 1.6, 1.7 to 1. It's still a lot, but it's not impeding fourth generation, unfortunately, on both sides. However, as I said, the fourth generation on the Russian side has a longer thread. So this is what I think Zappo was about. Zappo was about demoralizing the Russians and showing them their shit based on the belief that they are shit. However, I cannot wrap my head around the situation because, as I already told you and as we both know, Zappo, as it stands, was a very specific area, and it would have relied on perfect intelligence, perfect knowledge of the area. So basically, you attack Zappo, you attack the front, you attack via warchief or whatever. You attack via warchief or whatever. Your situation needs to be perfect from day one. Everybody says that. 65th said it was a 3-day operation for Rabotino. 47 said they had to march 12 kilometers. This is guy from 47. 12 kilometers the first day. Guy captured for the 31st. Guy is captured for the 35th, 37th. They were supposed to go beyond the first line the very first days, if not the very first 24 hours. We can see, I made a thread, I reposted it, I'm going to repost it if you want, over one specific case, which is Novodonetsk. Novodonetsk is a perfect example on why the Ukrainians and the Americans, but especially the Ukrainians, had no fucking clue where were they going. The attack on Novodonetsk, I said, relied on overcoming the Shaitanka River. It's not a very deep river, but it creates multiple choke points around Donetsk. And if the area is mined, which of course was, you are going to be forced to be funneled into a place. And I posted the video. It could also be from Novodorivka, but it's the exact same premise. Ukrainians were supposed to go there, breach charge a passage, go through it with MRAPs, tanks, whatever, hold it, repel the first counter-offensive or whatever they thought was going to come, and then wait a second wave to push forward. What happened? They misjudged their passages. They had no knowledge of the minefields. They tried the Miklik. One Miklik got blown by ATGM. Another one, breach UR-77, apparently didn't function and was blown subsequently by themselves, which they passed for a Russian UR-77. This is a funny thing with Ukrainians. When it comes to PR, they're super smart. I need to admit. They're so fucking smart. And then, once they were past those choke points, they got bogged down by mines, by the defenders who were very well placed. And suddenly, remember the first fucking day it happened when the American intelligence service said, oh, very good advance the first day from 5 to 7 kilometers. And when you check, like, where exactly from? When you see their starting point to the contact line, it is 5 to 7 kilometers. So basically, they were bogged down almost immediately and were finished. Then we have in Novodorivka, you have the Alyosha episode that you've already seen. So I'm not going to speak about it, but just to tell you that the biggest situational awareness problem wasn't the terrain itself, wasn't the Russian itself. It was already in their minds. And this guy admits it. He said, like, we show up with Western shit, this guy's going to flee because that's what they do. They flew in Kharkov, they flew in Kherson. These are, I'm going to tell something, these are self-inflicted wounds. Because unfortunately, it's going to stay. Even if now Russia completely takes over Ukraine, they're still going to stay that they fled from Kherson. It's still going to say that Kharkov, which is very close and which benefits from better supply lines was never really attempted. It's going to stay. The problem is that everything evolves. The war is a perpetual evolution within chaos. The only thing is making sure that you get the right side of chaos. And to that aspect, you have probably read a lot of threads recently about how the plan was perfect and how it was completely logical to think that the attack in Zapor and Robotine was going to go straight up to the sea. Azovsky, no problem. It was perfectly logical to expect that. And you're like, bro, bitch, even your attack in Kharkov covered between 49 and 60 kilometers. I want to throw it around. And it was 10 to 11 days. In a depleted area where you went as fast as possible, and when the reinforcement was from the Russian side was such a shit show. But even there, it's 10 to 11 days. So once again, I go back to what that article I pointed out. Hubris, complete miscalculation of the Ukrainian needs, and this is based on this, as I said, incestuous relationship between the Western propaganda and Ukrainian propaganda. And if you want to basically find the best example of that, NAFO. Don't go further than NAFO. NAFO is the perfect way how you can see that Western propaganda is not only unhinged when it comes to Ukraine. It makes no fucking sense. And we're not speaking about David. We're not speaking about all these stupid accounts. We're speaking about the geolocators. By the way, finally, Cope Klassen, Imo Klassen has blocked me because he posted at some point that Russians were making ad hoc temporary field landing strips for helicopters. The problem, though, is that he shows an image with no sink floors. No sink floors are a specific point of permanent basis because that shit weighs a fucking ton and it's visible from above. And I showed him that fixed long-term bases in Afghanistan back in the days of the USSR used the same no-sink floors. This is the problem we have. The Western propaganda machine that was working lockstep with the Ukrainian propaganda machine at every level. So you got guys who write pieces on how Putin is doomed, how Russia doesn't have missiles, how the Russian economy is going to fucking sink. And you got these guys at every step. I'm arguing with people who come up with pre-prepared point that Russian economy has now 20 million in debtors in microcredits between 200 and 700 euros. I'll turn around and it's like, okay, you're Polish, right? Perfect. What is the household debt in Poland? The average. Because that's the funny part. Poland is a country of 37 million something. It has a household debt of almost 200 billion euros. Russia, 140 something country, has a household debt of roughly $350 million. So about $330 billion, 330 billion euros. Divide them by your working population. Let's say that you got 20 million on the Polish side, and you got about 7 to 8 million on the Russian side. If you make the division, the Polish are far more in debt. Why? Because, of course, mortgages, loans for cars, for personal, whatever. But when you do that analysis, you understand that actually Russians are not in such a bad condition. I'm not saying it's perfect, quite the contrary. I'm saying once you start seeing in depth, once you start making the analysis, you understand that the situation that is being presented is in fact a lot like we are doing at Team War Criminal. Sometimes we brush off our own losses, not because they don't exist, but our point is to show that a war is a fucking mirrored image. If you want to know how good we're doing, it's true that we should see what we are doing. what are we losing, and so on. But at the same time, we cannot analyze our losses if we don't use the proper metrics for the other side. And it's true that sometimes both sides are too greedy and look only at what's happening on the ground, forgetting both on losses, on advances, on force generation, force balance. But they forget something else. Who has the most, but the more to lose and to give? Russia. Who right now, I'm not saying in a year, 2 years, and so on, who has a military industrial complex that it's not going full tilt? Trust me, it is not. Because some other choices need to be made by the Russians on the fucking mobilization of what they have now, not tomorrow, not in 2 years. Right now, there are still huge redundancies within the system. As I said, it would have been better in the sense to stop refurbishing some type of tanks and start the reproduction. The T-80 production line, by the way, is going to start in March 2024. I don't know what they're going to do with it, because if you want a better solution for the Russian needs right now when it comes to protection, you have to enlarge the T-80 chassis. If you do that and you can produce the turbine, you can solve a huge problem with the T-80 protection. You can use a turbine, but use a autoloader from the T-72 instead of using the one, and then you can put your rack like a T-90 on the back, which has issues, but at least would allow most of your crew not to get cooked if your standing up charges are hit, because the exposure is bigger, etc., 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 etc. But also would allow you to have a different gun, a gun that was expected on the Armata, but could be installed on the legacy tanks. Right now, it's impossible because both turret baskets are too narrow to be using the mechanism of the gun, the 282, A82 125 millimeter gun. Anyway, that's for something else. But in general, what I wanted to convey here is that the biggest problem right now for the Ukrainians and the attack on Gorlovka is exactly that, is that they are forced, the impetus to do something is on them. The impetus to go on this fucking stupid offensive on the Kopani angle, to try and push Novoprokopivka, to try and push on Verbove, is theirs. The whole fucking situation in Krinky, they are trying to do something that they know has, for the moment and for the foreseeable future, no chance of working. And this is the danger here. Snake said something very special, and I am more than agreeing with him these later times. The war on the Ukrainian side tilted at the place where the war on the Russian side was over a year ago. On the Russian side, the war was political from February to probably July. And I'm going to tell you why. Because Putin wanted oblast limits. It worked for Lugansk. It didn't work for Kherson. It didn't work for Donetsk. It kind of worked for Zaporozhye because it still allows the political and logistical goal of having the Crimean land bridge. But other than that, the front lines were too big. Losses were important because you got this whole huge front line. As I said, you've got 3,000 kilometers of front line, and you lose one vehicle per kilometer or per 10 kilometers. It's not going to be the same if you have 1,000 vehicles on front line and you lose the same. It's just simple fucking math. So once the political goal were submitted to the military capacities and the military realities, things started to change. Now the Ukrainians are literally on the face that the Russians were last year. Their war now is political. And this is why I insisted for a lot of guys on the fact that the attack now in Avdiivka, and if the whole plan works perfectly, and the blow for the Ukrainian leadership is political first and foremost, there is where we are getting in under their skin. There is where Zelensky doesn't lose power, but he loses the military and political support from people who are keeping him afloat. This, of course, is not going to be so simple because at the end, for America, it's dead Russians. They speak Ukrainian, they speak Russian, who the fuck cares? It's still a huge dent to Russia. It's money that Russia is going to spend, like in 2 to 3 years, they're going to spend 300 billion. Of course, they earned a lot of cash during the 2022 energy crunch. But still, it's money that Russia could have put to actually do something else. So for the Americans, it's perfect. Is the whole country in Europe getting smashed, destroyed, and incurring 1 to 1.3 trillion dollars of damage? Who cares? At the end, best case scenario, guys from huge American companies go buy the land on cheap, start promoting. For them, actually, the main loss is going to be political. Rebuilding Ukraine, even the rump state, is still going to be a win. To be honest, given how they're helping Ukraine, most of the money that the American state has allocated to Ukraine is still spent in the US. Of course, it makes it a bit more complicated for the US Army to keep the same level of proficiency. As I said, everything they're going to start building now is going to cost triple or quadruple. But at the end, who the fuck cares? The big prize for the Americans right now is whatever prestige is lost, whatever political acumen and political capital is lost, is to be sure that the next war they're ready on things that hadn't thought before. And this is what the Ukrainians are doing for them. Of course, you cannot learn if you don't have the hands-in approach. Look at the Israelis. Sometimes I look at the images on both sides. I want to cry because, like, for fuck's sake, you had 21 months of war in Ukraine, and I mean, you start putting shitty cop cages that we don't work, and thank God, in the sense that the Israelis don't have a huge nemesis because you never know what the fuck they're going to do if the losses were really important and they start losing dozens of vehicles per day the way the Russians were at some point. Like, the Israeli tank war is 300 to 600 tanks strong at any time. Then that's why they also started putting out the Merkava 3s because they didn't have enough in readiness to go for Gaza. But, you know, like, in a sense, you can see that if you don't have a hands-in approach, you don't really learn. However, on the technical aspect, they're learning a lot. China even more. I said it. They have the receipts on both sides, so they know exactly what to expect when it comes to cheap and affordable. There, where the Americans are completely on the other spectrum, and are in my opinion, there is a retardation within the U.S. planning right now. Because I don't know if you guys saw the latest U.S. Marine Corps anti-drone maneuvers, but they are using proprietary drones, proprietary anti-drone guns. You got a U.S. Marine walking around with $100,000, whereas a Ukrainian guy is there with his 4 FPVs at maybe $4,000 max. His Estonian anti-drone gun at 12,000, and they're going to work just the same. We spoke about the inflation on the Western MiG, but at some point, that's how they're going to lose this war. If they ever go to war with a manufacturing super hyperpower like China. So the whole point of this was to literally explain, first of all, that the Ukrainians believe their own lies or their own PR, let's say, call it PR. Second of all, we now have the certainty that the Ministry of Defense at some point didn't give a rat's ass about Bakhmut, given that the timetable for Bakhmut was getting exceeded while the timetable for Zapo was ticking closer. The third point is that if you read the article, this is something else I wanted to point out. The company commander said that when you had the guys in the beginning, everything was diverse, but where it stood was that the people like him, who he said like, yeah, why your name is Fritz, and we learned that Fritz is because his parents met each other in Siberia because they were UPA supporters. You could see, and this is what a lot of people said at that time, the backbone of all these supposed counter brigades was ideological, but the meat, the fat, and the joints were not. He says in the interview that it was diverse. You got guys who came there because they were forced to. You got other people who came there first day and put a certificate said, I cannot be fighting. So there were a lot of wastage, a lot of inequality in the human capital that was invested in these brigades. And this is something that Ukrainians right now, there's a spectator piece coming up with a Ukrainian author saying that Zelensky needs to be honest to the Ukrainian population and tell them, guys, now it's done. We need to actually do a mass mobilization. And we already discussed this. I'm turning now like, with what? Where? How? In the article, you can read the biggest situation for them is that at some point they couldn't replace losses. And he says it himself, that we're going to have another counter next year. And he said, bro, I don't have legs. I don't have extra legs for another counter. Quick recover. That line right there is exactly what the problem is. It's a meme now, and I swear to God, you guys should like post it everywhere. Plaster Ukrainians with that. NAFOids, whatever, do it. Because that's exactly what's going on here. For the moment, Ukraine doesn't have spare legs for another counter. And this is where they're getting fucking shanked in Avdiivka. However, we should not forget from the Russian side that the biggest trouble that we have is a huge inertia. And that right now, there is in my opinion, we joke about it, we call the Tuvan baboon, we call monkey. At the end, all of this is disrespectful. And in my opinion, it is due to the fact that a lot of mistakes were made and there was no clear choice. That is incompetence. That is, indecision is the mother of incompetence. I'm going to tell you. And I'm going to take my own experience. 15 years ago, I had to make a choice. And I pushed it as back as possible. And at the end, I lost both alternatives. And I had to go for something way worse initially. This is, I think, what lasted so long on the Russian side. Until that Al-Harb came by and said, guys, we got to get the fuck out of Kherson. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it. I don't want to fucking see HIMARS striking swimming Russian people across the Dnieper. He was right. And I think this is why he didn't end up on a plane playing with catch with a grenade. It's sad, but it is what it is. So in this case, the biggest situation that we have in the Russian side is that whatever happens until the end of 2023, the plan would have been perfect to stabilize whatever they had. If Avdiivka goes to the end, to the hilt, then it would be a great success to close the year. With losses, of course, we're not discussing them. Right now, we're going to discuss them later on. But the major point right now, at this moment, is that the Russian position, due to a lot of things that we can glean from multiple sources, is not only better, but is about to become a lot better until the month of March, April, and May. Then a new war will start, in my opinion, where Russia will need to worry more about a component and a front. It was alone and really unchallenged, and that's, as I said, F-16 are going to come. We're going to see what is going to be their role and how they're going to be implemented by the Ukrainian side. But the situation is very simple and very sincere, and that's honestly I'm trying to find a wording without sounding too doomy. Russia has now about 6 months to turn this war into something ineluctable for the Ukrainian side. Basically a done deal. If Russia turns it into a done deal, it's done. As simple as that. Once the Ukrainians' only chance would be to try silly and completely crazy shit like, as I said, like Energodar or the recent Gorlovka attempt, it's a done deal. We don't need to discuss it anymore. The more desperate they're going to become, the less efficient they're going to become. So, yeah. In my opinion, we're into the done deal logic, and nothing is going to ever change once that, as I said, the situation on Donbass area changes completely, and the situation on the Zaporozhye area changes completely, in the sense that Ukrainians are going to stop simply because the losses, even though they're smaller, they're just gonna end up. They're gonna be done with a lot of things. That's it. Have a nice day. I'm gonna do a quick question and answer, of course, but that was my point right now, and executive summary is mostly that. Now we have a better view on what happened during the counter, prior to the counter, what the preparation phase was, what the timetable constraints were for the Russians, while it impacted the Ukrainians so hard, and the Russians even harder, especially the relationship between Wagner and the Ministry of Defense. And the most important part, and this is something that you know, I know, everybody knows, how can we explain the failure on the Ukrainian side? And the failure on the Ukrainian side is, as I said, both external and internal hubris, absolute lack of self-reflection, and this is something I already said, and absolute lack of actual thinking, positive, negative, but critical thinking based on their awareness situation. So basically, nobody tried to suppress the leak effects. Quite the contrary, the brigades stayed the same. They kept with their role, probably because they said, yeah, anyway, Russians know, so it doesn't matter that much. And also, I think, as I said, a very incestuous and dangerous relationship was born between Western PR and Ukrainian PR. So on the political side of the deal, the Ukrainians lost the plot. And of course, they lost it in a very simple way. They were on a roll until more or less January 2023. And then the music stopped, but they kept dancing. And they kept dancing by the music they had memorized. At some point, you start missing notes, you start missing pointers, and you end up with Bakhmut, with the failed counter, and now with the probable loss of Avdiivka. That's it. Thank you very much for this space. And it's up to you guys if you want to intervene. Shoot. If you don't, no problem. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. So up to you. Okay, I think that as usual, when things become too repetitive, so basically a lot of spaces lately, there is not much to say because that's one thing I always refused, is to do sit reps. And yeah, okay, Snake, it's up to you, man.
That they're doing a diversionary attack in Gorlovka to try to divert resources from Avdiivka. Like that, this is exactly the same attack that was mentioned in that Time article that was then like lampooned as like Steiner's counterattack, but that the Ukrainian officers who were interviewed said they didn't want to do it. But of course, I mean, ultimately, yeah, they're doing it, which just goes to show just who actually controls everything, who actually gives the orders, and who actually follows. In the end, like I just want to remind people, like we've heard all these like schizo rumors of infighting and coup attempts and whatever in the Ukrainian state, but like really, there's not a whole lot of credence to go on it, and if it really comes to it, like the AFU is completely subordinated as an institution. So just don't get your hopes up over that. Zelensky will be around for a while.
We spoke about this, and I said I agree. I had this feeling. Sorry, I'm eating. That Zelensky was going to lose his pregnancy, his control at some point. But no, you were right. He actually did it well. He cleared up the ranks, probably around the period when he fired a large bunch of people from supposedly military commissariats, so basically people who deal with enlistment, that, according to people on the ground, made the situation a lot worse on that aspect. But probably among the people who were kicked out from those offices were also cogs within the military command and control, probably people who weren't all that happy to do that apparently Zelensky wants to do, and he has probably cleared house between March and June, amid the backdrop of Bakhmut, in my opinion. So yeah, on that one, yeah, we spoke privately before doing this. 100% right. This is proving to be hilariously both stupid, previsible, and also I told you that my sentiment is that the way and place where they're attacking reduces the chances, maybe not of success. As I said, I'm not going to speak about anything until this thing dies down. But the chance of exploiting it, because they are going through the most in hospital places around that area. Of course, it's the hardest part, and it's always good to get it under control. But that also means that at some point you will not be able to go through there via mechanized force. You will have to still go on the down low. Okay, you're not going to have your flanks exposed, apparently, but still you need to go through the minefields, and then you need to advance along the road. We have already seen this, and it looks a lot like the repeat of Rubizhnoye last year, where they actually repelled the Russians for a while, then they got backslapped. So it almost looks to me like a really a operation designed to fail, where they're doing it so they can say they did something. So not be in bad terms with Zelia, but also not be able to do much. And if the Russians do not care for it, a bit like they did in Bakhmut, where Ukrainians had some kind of nice advance initially, and they lock it down later on because they want Avdiivka is more important, then we will have another situation that's happening right now, where the Ukrainians are once again into a suicide mission. They know it. It ends up in suicide, and then at the end, we are going to have nice PR speeches and all this aspect that, unfortunately, we need to admit they are so much better than the Russians, and by far. So, if anyone else wants to intervene, guys, up to you. Nope. Okay. I know it was short. It was just like parts of things that I had upon my mind. Now that we are having a bit more clarity over how the things went from roughly April to, in this case, June, because then the guy was in the hospital. The rest we saw it live. So yeah, this operation was doomed from the beginning, and the results are telling. Thank you very much for being on this space, and see you next time. There's going to be a bit of delay for the next one. First of all, because I want to do a proper one with actual things to say, not just some kind of guesstimate analytics based on one or two testimonies or interviews. But I also want to check the in-depth, and I said if those satellite images are not true or are true, then the Ukrainians are in a way better, I'd say, in the way worse mental situation when they are agreeing, as Snake said, to go and attack Gorlovka at the worst part of the front, and try and make a move on Energodar without a plan to exploit whatever they're going to try and do there. Have a nice day, guys, and see you on the comments and on the threads. Bye-bye.